Hi, my name's Grady Blunt, and I'm a freshman at the University of Georgia. I first wanted to apologize for having to film this on my phone. I was trying to do it on my laptop, and my laptop is not as smart as I wish it would be, and can't record a video for more than about 45 seconds before it froze. So this is what I can do right now, and I hope that it works well. Um, I first heard about Camp Highland from my older sister, who was the counselor for a couple of summers when she was in college. So from her point of view, had gotten to hear about like the ropes courses and just kind of the things to do, like what physically goes on at Camp Highland. But it hasn't been until this past semester when I got to meet people who had just worked there this past summer here at UGA, where I really got to hear the emotional and spiritual side of what it's like to be there working with the like select few counselors for the entire summer, as well as then like pouring into the campers the whole time. It's good to hear both sides. I'm very glad that I've gotten to hear the more mental side of it now. I wish I had heard some more of that from my sister, but I mean, that's not anything that I blame her for. I'm glad to get to hear both sides of it. I've honestly procrastinated on making this video because a large part of me is very scared that I'm not doing it for the right reasons, that my motives are too selfish in wanting to apply. But I was talking to Lily Simpson about it and just the way I was feeling about applying, and she immediately shut me down and said, "Don't forget that God is bigger than your motives. He isn't going to not use me because I don't meet my own emotional expectations for myself right now. That if Camp Highland is where God wants me, that He's going to make that clear to me, and He's going to use me regardless of the way that I feel about myself doing it right now, that He's going to have His way done and He's going to be glorified through anything, period." So it's a way that I can trust God in applying. I know that if I don't apply, that's automatically a shut door, but now getting to apply, then it gives God the decision instead of me trying to figure out what I want to do this summer. So it's a step in trust, and I hope that even if Camp Highland is a closed door, I know that through that God will open another one, and that I'm just praying now that whatever door gets closed, that I won't accept it with bitterness, but with like a heart of peace and knowing that something else God has for me is better, and that's why any door might not work out for me. The reason that I feel like I'm applying selfishly is because I know that I need to keep structure in my life over the summer, especially spiritually. I'm very worried about having to just go back to my parents' house for the summer. I honestly don't like the person that I was in high school, and have grown so much more than I ever thought I would just this freshman year. And I'm worried that I would have to just go back to my parents' house, and I don't want to be in a habitat that fosters the kind of person that I was back then. And that's what worries me, is that I don't feel completely like I'm wanting to do this because I want to serve the campers. That definitely is true, that I want to, that's a part of it. But since that's not the first thing that comes to mind, I start to doubt why I want to do it, which then in turn, like the doubts play into why I think I should apply and why this Camp Highland is where God wants me to be this summer. The fact that I can tell that there's spiritual warfare around me even wanting to apply is what backs it up for me, of knowing that Satan wants me to be confused and have doubts, that this is the right choice. That's how I know that I'm on the right track. If it was completely easy, I think that's what would worry me more about if I should be doing it or not. I like writing stuff down. I've kind of written down some things I want to talk about just because I know that if I don't, I'm going to ramble and it's going to be a mess. So I'm sorry just for looking off. I know that this application is a way that I get to trust God completely. It's been the biggest act of trust that I've had to use since whenever I first applied at UGA and tried to find a roommate. And it that's a situation that brings me hope now for continuing to trust God. I couldn't ever find a roommate that I wanted, and so I wound up just going random. And I remember over the summer telling God, like, I expect you to give me the roommate that I need, not necessarily the one that I want. And I got here, and I had a very bad roommate. And I thought, God, you got this wrong. Please try again. Like, I trusted you, and you failed me this time. This isn't who I need. And it became very clear after, like, the third week of classes that that was who I needed, because it gave me the chance to meet a guy who's now my best friend and hopefully will be for the rest of my life. And I would have met him anyways, but I wouldn't have met him and known him the way that I do now if it wasn't for having that original bad roommate that I needed to avoid that situation and not be in my room. So I think of that every time that I get worried about this application and think about the way that I need to be trusting God. I just remember the last time I needed to trust him well, he completely provided for me way bigger than I ever thought that he was going to. Even though I feel like I may be doing this for selfish reasons, at the same time, I know that me pouring into these kids is going to be what grows me and matures me the most. It still seems weird to think of it that way, but I know giving back is what's going to grow me the most. I've worked with like elementary schoolers and middle schoolers when I was in middle and high school. I worked with elementary schoolers when I was in middle school and middle schoolers when I was in high school at the church that I grew up with. And I always had a lot of fun at the time, like in the camp, because if I needed to act like an 8-year-old boy with 8-year-olds, then I feel like just personally I could do that I could go run around and be a little idiot and get mud everywhere and have fun with them. But at the same time, I could be like someone who they could respect and be the leader that they needed to look up to while I was there at the camp for the week. And kind of the same thing now with high schoolers. I want to be a resource for them to not have to make the same mistakes that I did. The goal that I think of when I think of being a counselor at Camp Highland and spending weeks with high schoolers is to make sure in some way that they don't graduate from high school the same way that I did, where people told me, like, you have to make your faith your own. You can't just live off of your parents or your friends' faith. And I understood the English words and thought, oh, okay, like that sounds nice, but that doesn't sound like me. Like, my faith is my own. You're kind of talking to the wrong person. But then as soon as I got to college, I didn't realize how much I was relying on the faith of my parents and friends, just because I hadn't asked myself a lot of theological questions before and asked myself what I believed and why I believed it, which seems so simple just to say, but at the same time it was so eye-opening to me to finally get to live through that and see how important it was. And I don't want to see other high schoolers going into college without being asked questions like, why do you believe what you believe, and being able to give legitimate answers for that. Personally, I want to be the camp counselor that I wish I had growing up. I want to be someone who asks the questions that I wish that I was asked. That way I could think through things for myself instead of coming to college and just kind of throwing away the way that I had been raised for a little bit. On one hand, I regret some of the decisions that I made at the beginning of college, but at the same time, I'm stubborn sometimes and know that I wouldn't be able to move on like spiritually and grow the way that I have without making mistakes and having to deal with the consequences on my own. That sometimes people can't just be told what needs to be done, but need to be able to live through the consequences of it too. And it seems a little backwards because I just said people can't always just be told that, but I want to be able to tell people that so that way they don't have to go through the consequences, because there are people who can just be told this is right, this is wrong, don't do the wrong thing, and it works for them. And I really don't want people to have to go through some of the hardships that I have. And I know that being able to spend a week with some of these kids and have them set aside from whatever else they were doing for the summer and their electronics is one of the best ways to communicate that to them. I honestly wish that I had gotten to go to Camp Highland as a camper, because I know that's one of the best ways that I would have responded, I think, to my faith and to God in high school, was if I had been somewhere completely set aside, because there were camps that I went to where we weren't allowed to have our phones, but it just seemed like I never emotionally detached myself from it, because I always knew it was in the room, and at the end of the night we could call our parents if we wanted to. It wasn't completely the detachment that I personally needed, because it kept me attached to like friends at home and what else was going on, when if I could have just been completely with the people who were trying to pour into me that week,